Is this thing on? Hello everybody, my name is Sama Peñalosa and today we'll be discussing the topic of representation, particularly representation of the Basque identity, as well as several other ethno-racial identities. Within that topic, we're going to be discussing maps, languages, and traditions, and how representation can be sometimes distorted within these topics for the whole world to see. And from that distortion, sometimes it can be very detrimental for these ethnicities or identities. And so I would like to discuss and maybe expose the underlying ideologies and hurtful perspectives, typically those who have higher power or more privileged than those that are marginalized or minoritized. Orson Welles' documentary actually exemplifies perfectly this distortion of the Basque identity. Orson Welles tends to alienate them a lot of the times.
Besides not being French or Spanish, my Basque is not Mediterranean, Alpine, Magyar, Celtic, Germanic, Semitic, nor Scandinavian. He isn't even Aryan.
I feel like he could have just said they're Basque, but instead he decided to say what they're not, literally alienating them, saying that they are not these things, they are not these identities, we don't know what they are. They're Basque, but what does that mean? What is Basque? Maybe we don't know, but saying it in that tone and using that diction and saying what they're not literally alienates them, therefore giving this perspective to the people like, oh, they're different. We don't know what they are. They're so unique. It's like looking at an animal in a cage, which, by the way, is wrong as well. But at the same time, it's like, oh, wow. What are you? Additionally, he tends to contradict himself sometimes. There was one moment where he was discussing with an American child who moved to the Basque country with his mother, and they were comparing the American education with the Basque education. And at first he was saying how, actually first let's take a look at their conversation.
But you have been to school in America, haven't
Yes.
you, for a while, so you can tell the difference between a Basque school and an American one. Which do you prefer? Going to school in France or in
In
back home?
America.
Why, because you learn more?
No, it's easier.
Notice how his response was, well, you learn more. And then the little child says, no, because it's easier. Well, let's take a look at his next remark.
Yes, well, we do think, don't you agree, Lyle, that there is a theory that education and indeed childhood should be associated with fun in America, which isn't shared in Europe.
So either the American education is better because they learn more, they have all these resources at their hands, or it's that they shouldn't have to work so hard because they also deserve a childhood, they deserve to have fun, and that should be associated with the American way of living. So which one is it? The mother, on the other hand, opinionated differently. She had expressed her thoughts that the Basque education was actually better than the American education. And this was actually Orson Welles' response, kind of diminishing the Basque education, if you ask me.
Here, frankly, I think they get a better education, Orson.
In this tiny village?
In this tiny village, they get the standard...
Better than, now, Chris went to school, didn't he, a couple of years ago, or for a couple of years, in America?
He went to school for 2 years in America, and he loved it, but I'm afraid the reason he loved it particularly was because it was so much easier. When we came back here, he had to go back. And every child is required to meet certain standards before he
Which
gets
are
on
much
to
higher
grade to grade.
standards than ours at home.
Which are much higher in almost all fields.
In education.
In education.
Yes.
That wasn't why we chose it for them, though.
Not just to make them work hard.
Not just to make them work hard. That's what we found after we got here. But when we chose it for them, we were really looking for the villages of our own childhood.
In this tiny village, What does the size have to do with anything? The mother also discussed how she loved living in that village, how it really fit to her needs. And then once again, this was Orson Welles' response. Very diminishing of the area, the village, and the Basque country in general.
Really, what is it you're gaining in this very far away little corner of the earth?
The mother was very quick and witty to respond, though.
A village is a village, and it doesn't make any difference what language it speaks.
Well, of course it doesn't for a child.
Not for a child unless you tell them so.
Yes.
And here in Cibourg, and probably places at home, but here in Cibourg where we've been able to live and to work ourselves, children walk out of their houses in the morning, kings of their kingdom, free of the streets. They come home when they're hungry or when they fall down. They know everybody in town. They have that sense of independence, and the Basques are independent people too.
This actually connects back to the statements that, or claims that Orson Welles was making, how the American way of living should be associated with having fun and having a childhood. Clearly, the way she explained it, it shows similarities between an American child and a Basque child, where they're playing, they fall down, they come home to eat, or they fall down and then they come home to be aided. And so you can really see how Orson Welles tends to contradict himself, almost intending to alienate the Basque identity because maybe he feels superior. It's almost as if Orson Welles is trying to find loopholes, a different path to take in order to have the last word, always trying to make his point louder than the mother's point. That's very detrimental to the Basque identity because it's completely disregarding their way of life as well. Everybody has a way of life, and so to be diminishing them or disregarding their way of life is to alienate them and distort the representation and provide negative perspectives of the Basque identity. Oh, he also said this about Basque people.
Forgive me, I don't think the Basques are totally civilized in the pure sense of that word, because civilization does imply city culture by definition, and these people don't have a city culture.
Maybe in the 1900s, mid-1900s, that's what it meant, but at least currently, in context, the connotation is that being civilized means that you are not violent, you aren't aggressive, you don't use vulgar language when addressing someone or interacting with someone.
They give a piece to the world, very polite, very nice. They give a piece to this town.
And a piece to their family.
A lot to the family.
And then sometimes Orson Welles just seems kind of apprehensive of what the Basque identity can do to those who move to the Basque country, for example, for the mother. And this is what Orson Welles says.
We do tend to seem to be criticizing our various countries, our various ways of living, and if we appreciate the Basques, it doesn't depreciate what is often called the American way of life. I think if an English...
She looks so done with his shit. Cool, let's move on to maps. In the introductory essay, Power and Politics of Mapping, maps can influence social and economic relations in particular places and times. For example, for the Basque country, since it was not a powerful country, it lacked official political status. In other words, it was not considered as an independent state. Surrounding nations actually took advantage of this and presented the Basque country as if it was land available for the taking. You can see how maps can be a powerful tool to misrepresent nations. Palestine was actually experiencing a similar situation in terms of misrepresentation. In fact, they weren't represented at all. In the early 2010s, they were removed from Google Maps mainly because they weren't considered as an independent state. It's kind of similar to how the Basque country was considered a not as an independent state. It lacked political status. But at the same time, it raises the question as to why would you remove Palestine from the map? Why would you present the Basque Country as available land for others to take? What is it that you gain? Most likely nothing. From our part, this is what we need to raise awareness for. And we need to let others know how these ethnicities and identities are being represented. Cool. Finally, we have languages and traditions. Language is almost always misrepresented, sometimes lacks utter representation. Orson Welles, for example, kind of describes the language Euskara as a weird language. You can see for yourself.
To this day, he speaks his own weird language.
Surely it's a different language, but not weird. That's just the way they speak. It's the way they communicate with each other. Nancy C. Dorian actually brings up a really good point in her article, Endangered Languages. She mentions that little power and low prestige is usually associated with language that would be unlikely thought of. And because they are unlikely thought of, they are going to be underrepresented or not represented at all, because the dominant language is going to be the one used. And so that can maybe even cause people to lose their language and force them to assimilate to the dominant language, which is very sad, because in the end they might lose their native language because of lack of representation via legal documents, labels, signs in stores, etc. I actually have had a couple of experiences with my language, Español, being underrepresented or even sometimes trying to be disregarded in some shape or form.
Hola a todos, todas, bienvenidos a Español 16A. Espero que hayan tenido buenas vacaciones and so forth. Spanish to English. Why? This is a Spanish course. Google, what are you doing?
Followed by,
Hola profesor, aquí le envío el examen final. Creo que hay una pregunta. Sam, thanks for sending the final exam. Best, Eduardo Raposo. But what really captures my attention is the fact that it suggests translate message. Why would I need to translate it? Please explain. This is in Spanish. Doesn't need any translation. Good. Sam, thanks for sending the final exam. Sounds very English to me. Ves, Eduardo Raposo. Sure, the name sounds Spanish, but okay, translate it. I don't see any translation occurring. So, why?
it's almost as if they're discriminating against the name as well, because I saw no other Spanish word in there other than the names being pronounced in Spanish, Eduardo Raposo. But it's a name, why would it be translated? Also, before you say that maybe it's trying to be processor friendly, maybe you don't understand the language, so I want to translate for so and so and blah blah blah. Take a look at the next example.
Here's my email. Hola María Inés, perdón por haber tardado con los textos literarios. Pero finalmente terminé. O sea, I speak Spanish / write. So does my professor, because this was a Spanish course. Hola Adrián, Muchas gracias. Ahora actualizo la nota en Gaucho Space. We both speak Spanish. And yet I'm given the option to translate from Spanish to English. Why? First of all, Google does a mediocre work at translating the language. Why? Because ahora actualizo la nota en Gaucho Space. That means I will update the grade on Gaucho Space. Now I update the note in Gaucho Space. Note is not, nota is not note, nota is grade. Now I update just sounds wrong. It's, I will now update the grade on Gaucho Space at the least, but of course not.
And before you say, oh, well, it's only happening with Spanish, in other words, underrepresentation. Finally, we have traditions. What are traditions? Typically, traditions are any events or practices that are practiced in a routinely manner or yearly, monthly, whatever the procedure or process that it is for each and every one of you, because everybody has a tradition. But it also comes down to when representing other traditions, it's usually misrepresented when you are trying to present them, but unintentionally culture appropriating or even inaccurately representing their traditions. For example, Madonna sings in Sagarra Bildu, she accidentally says
Calican Trio, Calican Trio, Calican Trio.
In actual fact, it's not the Calican Trio, it's the Calican 4.
and this.
Or as Madonna says, Sagara yo, motherfuckers!
I wonder if she took the time to ask them, what is their group precisely? And why did she use such vulgar language? Here's actually footage from one person who did not agree with how they were being represented.
Galdetuko nuke edo behintzat frogatuko nuke ea gure nortasuna errespetatuko den. Alegia ez digula irentsiko eta gu ez garen ezertan bihurtu nahi izango. Hori ala balitz hitz egingo genuke.
So, in short, representation is very important to be taken seriously when representing others. In order for representation to be at its most appropriate and accurate, it is important to communicate with those people when you are attempting to represent them, asking them questions as like, is this correct? Is this the way it is? How do you feel about this? Those type of questions will most definitely help in better representing these ethnicities and identities. And yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this.